Steve Harlan, welcome to Partnering Leadership. I am thrilled to have you join me today.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
You have been one of the most significant people in many people's lives in this community and this region, including myself, which is why I am thrilled to have a conversation with you to find out a little bit more about you and get a chance to share some of your story with more people in our region and way beyond. Steve, obviously, where we grow up and how we grow up has a big impact on who we become. Whereabouts did you grow up, and how did that contribute to the kind of leader that you became?
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, in South St. Louis. Our family didn't have a lot of money, but we got by. And I went to grade school and high school there. I'm reminded of that part of my life in that years later, I went back to a high school reunion, and in a high school reunion, they pass out their yearbooks from the class that you were in. And everybody had their picture in the yearbook and had all the things that they were involved in. Well, my picture was in the yearbook, but not one activity did I participate in high school. I was a total slug, if you will. But I rationalized that by saying I always had a job after school. So I left school and I went to work. I did what young guys do on all kinds of part-time jobs like that. Soda jerk, usher in a movie theater, worked in a bread factory, worked at the St. Louis Zoo, always doing something like that. So I rationalized my lack of high school activity that way. But later in life, I found that it really pays off to be active. So I've changed that approach to life. But I grew up then uh, and graduated from high school. Went to work for a year and got a little money and went to Southern Illinois University. That was the reason I selected that. That was the lowest price school I could find in the region. Carbondale, Illinois. It was a small school at that time. It's a huge school. But and while I was there, I kind of ran out of money and enlisted in the Army. I enlisted in the part of the Signal Corps, which was the Army Security Agency, which was a communications reconnaissance and secure company. We were copying codes from all over the world, and I studied to be a code copier at a low level, company level, and was sent to I went to Fort Devens, Massachusetts, studied that for 6 months, and was sent to Korea. Living in Korea and copying codes, we were working tricks. You work 8 hours, you're off the rest of the day and the evening, and you move those around. But you have a lot of time. And I saw a sign on the bulletin board in Korea, in our company, that they wanted an accountant for the club, keep the books for the NCO club. So I put my name down. Then I figured out that I wasn't an accountant at all. I didn't know a first thing about keeping a set of books. So I figured out that I needed some help from somebody. I found a guy that was studying for the CPA exam. And I said, I want you to teach me how to keep a set of books. Yeah, and I said, why didn't you apply for the job? It pays pretty well. And he said, I'm studying. I don't have time to do that. So he taught me how to keep a very rudimentary set of books. And the unit was then transferred from Korea to Japan. Commanding officer came in and said to Harlan, he said, if you will extend in the Far East for a year, you can run the club. And I said, run the club. And you got to move it from here. Korea, you got to get a seat over in Japan. We're going into a garrison kind of structure. You're going to have to hire people and you're going to have to run the club, and booze and food and things like that. And it was the greatest opportunity, I think, of my life. I've never run anything ever before. And I was given this opportunity, and it was a wonderful opportunity. And I found out something there. I found that the most powerful phrase in the English language in my advanced age, looking back over my career, is the phrase, I need your help. I need your help. And I found a master sergeant who was running a club about 30 miles away, who was just an outstanding, we were in southern Honshu, there was a lot of military around there. And I went up to him, I said, Sergeant, I said, I've done some investigation on how to run clubs, and I've read the rules and the laws, and I see that there's a lot of club managers who have gone to jail because they were selling whiskey on the black market or cigarettes or whatever. This was in the mid 50s. This is right after the Korean War was over, before Vietnam. And so I said, I need your help. And he helped me. He taught me where the minefields were in this whole thing, and how to really run a successful club. How do you buy entertainment? Where do you get it? How do you buy food? Where do you get it? And those kind of things. So I had a great experience there. Came back, went to University of Missouri, studied accounting, because that's what I figured I was fairly good at, and did well there, and finally went and graduated and thought I'd go in the real estate business, and got married, had a baby, and found out that the real estate business is not a business. There's a lot of front end cash, you know. So I needed a job, and so I went to St. Louis and went into Pete Marwick at the time, and I'd talked to them before deciding to go in the real estate business. I said, the managing partner there, and I said, look, this real estate thing is not working out for me so well. Will you hire me? And he said he would. He paid me the princely sum of $400 a month.
Wow.
$4,800 a year. I have a wife and a baby. It was not a lot of money, and but it worked out well. I spent 33 years with Pete Marwick, KPMG. I had a great, lot of fun and a lot of career. And I found out some other things that really helped me was that in order to be successful, you got to figure out how do you make yourself a little different than the rest of the crowd. And I had an experience where I gained a little bit of knowledge about computers. Well, this is in the early 60s. And I started writing our executive office in New York. This was after I became an audit partner, a young audit partner. And I said, we've got a lot of savings loan clients here, and Burroughs Company is doing a beta test site on online accounting. Online accounting had not been there. Prior to that, everybody had a passbook and, you know, did things like that. But online accounting was happening, and I said, from my perspective and our clients dealing with Burroughs, it's going to change our audit approach. So we need to be getting on this thing and figuring it out. And I wrote a couple of letters, and finally the guy that was running the audit practice asked me to come to New York, and he said, I want you to be the first partner in charge of computer auditing. And I'll tell you, it was one-eyed in the land of the blind. I figured, okay, now what do I do? So I went over to IBM and I said, I need your help, you know. And we need to train up several hundred young auditors. I'll pick the auditors. I want people that were going to be successful and had a career there. Didn't want to waste a lot of training on folks who weren't going to be successful or who were not career-minded. And we started with classes of 35 or 40. And we trained up a lot of computer audit specialists and totally changed the way the firm was approaching auditing and audit concepts. And so that worked well. I did that for 5 years, and then they said, okay, now what do you want to do? And I said, I want to run an office. And they said, where do you want to run? I said, anywhere you send me, I'm wide open. I'd like not to go to Detroit. I didn't like Detroit very well. So they said, well, we need a new managing partner in Washington. And I came down here as managing partner in 1975. And it was just wonderful. I found that Washington greeted newcomers with open arms. And one of the first things that happened to me here, man, is I was here about a week and a half or 2 weeks, and I got a call and said, would I accept a meeting with the incoming and outgoing presidents, two guys, of the Board of Trade at that time? And I said, I'd be delighted to. So they came in and welcomed me and said, we're happy you're here. But we have a favor to ask of you. I said, oh, really? Yeah. We'd like you to give us a young executive to run our jobs program for this summer. I says, well, okay, what does that entail? They described it. And I said, now who's going to pay this young executive? And they looked at me and said, you are. So they wanted a loan executive for several months. I said, I don't know the folks very well at all. I said, if you'll give me a couple of weeks to figure out who might be successful at that, I don't want to send somebody over there that wasn't going to be successful. And we got that done. And from that moment on, that crowd at the Board of Trade just helped me at every turn. And I was the first accountant ever to be a president of the Board of Trade. And now they call it chairman, but the president of the Board of Trade. So it was a wonderful, wonderful experience, and had a great time. We built it up pretty well. We went to, I guess we got here, we had a couple of hundred people. And I was transferred back to New York in 1987. I ran the office in Washington for 12 years. And at that time, I just loved the city, loved the people, loved the opportunities. We grew it. We grew up to over 800 people in the office, and it was a successful office. And it was just a great experience. The people were great. We worked hard at training our people, worked hard at making great selections of people, and it really turned out. One of the great successes that I think is John Veihmeyer, for instance. Hired him, he worked for me. He became a partner and became managing partner of the office for a while. Then it ended up running all of KPMG worldwide. And that to me is my greatest success, is bringing young people along and helping them be successful. Because one thing I do know is that if you'll help someone be successful, I can't explain it, but it comes back multiple times. It really does. And you don't have to ask for it. You just keep helping people, and those people and others will turn around and help you, and it works. So I've learned a couple of interesting things. One is don't be afraid to ask for help. And in fact, it's a great thing, is tell people I need your help. And the other is help a lot of people.
And you have done a fabulous job of that, Steve. And I would love to get into some of your involvement and the help that you have provided to so many organizations and so many people. But you also mentioned the fact that in the Army, you sought the opportunity to run the club when at KPMG early on. You sought the opportunity to look into computers and their use in accounting. So what was it in you to run after those type of opportunities before then we get involved in the conversation around your contribution to the community?
I don't really know, man. One of the first guys I ever worked for in Pete Marwick in St. Louis was a wonderful new partner when he hired me and I worked for him. He said, one advice I give you, he said, no, you have to understand, I went through the Dale Carnegie course here in St. Louis, and it helped me a lot. And one thing I know is you got to be enthusiastic about what you do in life. You got to have a lot of zip. You got to feel like it's important and make it important to yourself. And in order to get the enthusiasm, you got to act enthusiastic. So to be enthusiastic, you act enthusiastic. And pretty soon it happens. And it happens. And I can't explain it. So I listen to that, and I've been trying to do that all my life, is you see an opportunity, be enthusiastic, go after it. If you think it's going to help you or help someone else, do it, you
And
know?
you have done a fabulous job of that in the community here. Back to 1985, you were selected as Washingtonian of the Year. And then a couple of years later on, you were the founding chairman of Leadership Greater Washington, which over the years has become so much bigger and so impactful in this region. Help me understand your thinking initially in founding this organization called Leadership Greater Washington.
Well, it wasn't an original idea for us in Washington. We searched around, several of us searched around, and then the Board of Trade was very active in thinking about leadership in Washington, and I was active with that. And we found that Leadership Washington had a very successful chapter, if you will. Not Leadership Washington, but the leadership concept had a very successful approach down in Atlanta. And one of the people that helped found and make that one successful had recently moved to Washington, a young woman, and we got her to work with us, and it worked out pretty well. 87 was the first year we had Leadership Washington, and that was the year I transferred to New York to run our international operations. So from 75 to 82, I ran the office here, and then I went back to New York. But the last great thing that I was involved with was Leadership Washington for that first class. And I went to not all of the sessions, but I went to a lot of them, and it was a wonderful class. In fact, I understand that some of the folks in that initial class are still very close friends and meet regularly.
They are, and they do,
I mean,
yes.
Think about that. That's 33 years ago. You know, it's amazing to me. Those lasting bonds, those lasting friendships worked, and one of the, every time you're a president or a chairman or something, they give you a little bit of an award. And they gave me an award, and they called it the Stevie Award. And what it was a white cue ball. You'd appreciate it. With a black tie on a little piece of wood with a black tie put on that, and I still got that award. White cue ball. It was so much fun, and those guys, it was just a wonderful experience, and it served, I think, as a good beginning foundation. Has been vastly improved. What you all are doing on Leadership Washington now is way beyond what we started out with, but you've taken it to just an outstanding level. I just am amazed at all the good things you guys are doing. So.
Improving on systems is important, Steve. That said, the vision and the initial vision is by itself was a leap for this region, and something that you were involved in making happen. Getting things started is a lot harder than keeping them rolling. So I appreciate your kind words. Now, you still stayed involved in the community, and DC, for some people that might not be familiar, was having a lot of financial and other issues and problems. When in 1995, DC had the choice between two different things. There was option one for the city to become, in essence, a federal receivership. And then option two was to establish a control board, which is what was preferred by everyone, the residents in DC and Eleanor Holmes Norton. You were one of the people that was appointed by President Clinton to be part of that control board, and were the vice chairman of the control board. So what brought about the control board? And then we can talk about some of the challenges and obviously the successes that the control board had in turning around the finances of the city.
Well, it was an interesting time for the city. The city had been grossly mismanaged financially. It was a time when Mayor Barry had prior to then had been arrested, and he was tried and convicted on a misdemeanor, and he was sent to jail, and he spent so many months in jail, I guess. And he came back, and he was reelected mayor. And the same election cycle that did that elected the Republicans to take over the House of Representatives. Clinton's in the White House, and the Republicans are now in charge of the House of Representatives that January. And the city had lost its credit support from Wall Street and was having a hard time in borrowing money. The chief financial officer at that time declared three 6-month taxing periods in 1 year to get the money flowing. In other words, borrowing from the future to pay for past sins. And Congress said, this is the nation's capital. We can't have that kind of stuff going on. So they did set up this control board. It did pass both houses of Congress and gave the president the authority to set up a 5-person control board. Not dissimilar than what happened in New York and then what happened in Chicago, large city financial difficulties. When the 5 of us were appointed, I was the only white guy. The other 4 were black, just outstanding people. In fact, I was by far the dumbest of the crowd. Andrew Brimmer, PhD, Harvard economics. I mean, he'd come more in one lifetime than any human being I've ever met. He was a product. His dad was a sharecropper in South Mississippi, and Bull Weevil came in and he lost his opportunity there. They moved to Washington State. He went in the Army in the Second World War, came back out, went to the University of Washington, did very, very well there. He's smart as a whip. And he got a scholarship to Harvard, and he was often blamed. He was on boards like United Airlines and Bank of America. He was all on boards of really large companies, and just brilliant guy, just brilliant. So he was the chairman. I was the vice chairman. The other 3 were 2 women and another man. There were 3 men, 2 women, 3 Democrats, 2 Republicans. And one thing I learned there is really interesting. In order to make progress, you have to work together. And to see the fighting that's going on now in our government, it just tears me up. What we found was the city was in really bad shape. Wall Street had cut off an open door policy of funding. It was, for instance, the police had trouble getting fuel for their cars because the oil companies had not been paid for the last shipments. The finances were in such bad shape that in the finance department of the city, the treasury department of the city, they had stacks and stacks of unopened mail that had not been processed, had checks in them. I mean, this thing was just a disaster. Nobody could believe how bad, and once you started digging down, how bad it was. And so we had to hire a chief financial officer. That's a great story within itself, because the chief financial officer we hired was Tony Williams. And the people that crafted the law that established the control board did something very smart. They said, once the control board appoints a chief, once the control board approves the appointment of a chief financial officer, only the control board could fire him. The mayor couldn't fire him. The mayor could hire him. We have to approve that hiring. But once hired, only the control board could fire him. So we were doing the interviews. The first 3 or 4 people that came in to apply for the job, we didn't even bother to interview. Their resume was so weak. We get this guy who is coming from St. Louis, by the way, where he was in charge of public housing there and economic development, who had a Harvard degree and a graduate degree in a Harvard lawyer. He's a Harvard Kennedy School graduate. Wonderful guy. He was the CFO of the agriculture department at the time, and he applied for this job. And in doing so, he sent the mayor a letter. The letter said, "Mr. Mayor, should you be wise enough to appoint me as chief financial officer, you will be the captain of the ship. I will be merely the navigator." So we got a copy of that letter. Our staff got a copy of the letter, and we're interviewing this guy. I said, "Mr. Williams, we got a copy of the letter that you sent to the mayor. What is this? He's going to be the captain of the ship. You're merely going to be the navigator." Williams looked at me. He said, "Got me this interview, didn't it?" And once, Tony is brilliant. Once he was appointed, he wanted to play everything very straight. And Barry got so mad at him. Quite frankly, we were very concerned about that relationship. We put security around Williams because we weren't sure how mad Barry was, because Williams would not approve some disbursements that Barry wanted to make. And Williams said, "No, you're not going to do it." And the mayor just went ballistic. So we hired him, and that's the beginning of a whole great story about how Williams became mayor, very successful mayor, and now he's very successful in the leadership of federal city council. You talk about leadership, that's leadership. He is just unbelievable. Anyhow, the years that we had the financial control, it worked out well. We were fortunate. We didn't have a pandemic to deal with. We didn't have a major financial crisis that everybody was losing their jobs or anything like that. But we were able to work around to where and work with the city council. And Jack Evans, who was on the council at the time, was very helpful in that he worked with Williams, and they worked with Wall Street, and we ended up. Right now, the city has the best financial rating of any city in this country. And we went from where you couldn't pay your bills to that during this long period. Anyway, it was a great experience. We ended up really working well together, this 5-person team. We split up the responsibility. One of the ladies had responsibility for oversighting the school. She had been the past president of Howard University. She was qualified to do that. She did that. Ed Singletary was former chief financial officer of the C&P telephone company. He a very qualified financial guy. I told you about Brimmer and the other woman, she was the deputy over at Smithsonian. So she was very, very smart and well qualified. And so the 5 of us worked together, and they're just wonderful people. And I think we were very successful. A lot of people pushed back because they said it wasn't democratic. That's true, because we were appointed. People would come up to me and say, "You ought to do this," or "You ought to do that." I said, why don't you get the president to appoint you to this job? And if you do, you can do it your way. Until then, I'm going to do it mine. And, I wasn't running for anything, and we could call some tough shots. But all of our votes were unanimous. All of them. Can you believe that? All of them unanimous, except for one. And Andrew Brimmer voted against the four of us on a particular issue. He held a press conference 2 weeks later. He said, I've reflected on that. My teammates were exactly right, and I'm changing my vote. I mean, could you see that today? Anybody doing something like that? That is wonderful. I mean, it just was a fantastic experience. So I look back on that era that was successful. I was very proud to be part of that team. And I think Washington is far better off because of it.
It's a testament to the character and the leadership of the individuals involved, where I imagine, as you said, each one of the individuals, you were all very successful, but willing to work with each other for the betterment of the city. And one of the reasons the city is doing so well so many years later was that much of the groundwork was laid for a turnaround with 5 people, along with many others, including Tony Williams, having done their share for the turnaround of the city. So it's an incredible leadership story in and of itself.
Well, thank you, but you're exactly right. And but I mean, it was just exciting to be involved in that. I was real proud. I had responsibility for the police department, and what does a broken down accountant need to know about policing? But you go to New York had a great system then, and we went up and studied that. And we looked what was happening in Chicago and a couple of other places. Finally hired Chief Ramsey, Chuck Ramsey, to be police chief. And that really worked out well. He's the best. And he went on, he left here and went over to Philadelphia and ran that, a much larger police department. And now he's doing, I guess CBS or one of the major networks has him as an advisor, and on-air advisor. Ramsey's outstanding.
And Steve, all the while that you were doing this, you stayed involved in many organizations contributing, whether it's Heroes Inc., Washington Police Foundation, U.S. Marine Corps Foundation, Community Foundation. And I recall a breakfast that you arranged at the Jefferson Hotel with another magnificent leader that I'm going to have on this podcast at some point, Ken Sparks, to introduce this young kid that back then happened to be me to the Federal City Council and to Ken. So you have given a lot to many organizations, and you have given a lot to a lot of individuals in the community. You alluded to it earlier, but I want to get more of your thoughts and insights on the why. What has been the drive for you to do so much for so many, both organizations and individuals in the community?
Well, I firmly believe this, and I guess it's an enlightened self-interest, and some would say that's not good. You should do it without any interest. Well, I believe that the more you give, the more you get. And it's positive, as long as it's positive. If it's positive, you stay positive. It helps you stay positive. There's always some negative thing floating around trying to knock you off track. Everybody's got that. Everybody's got it. And you stay positive. The more you help others, the more others will help you. The more you give, the more you get. And it's worked out in my life that way. I've been fortunate enough to be asked to be involved in a number of organizations. And I always tried to do my best. Sometimes I was way over my head, like being the first partner in charge of computer auditing, or trying to keep a set of books that I didn't know what a set of books looked like. And don't worry about that stuff. It'll work out. Go reach for it. Go do it. And help others, help others, help others.
So, Steve, I know a lot of wonderful people came through the KPMG offices here in Washington, and you were known for finding and developing great talent too.
Well, I'll tell you, we were lucky. We had great recruiters, and we offered a good program. it wasn't all just in accounting. Hired a woman to be my secretary at one time, and she worked there for a while, and then the woman that was handling some of our public relations work left to start the business journal. Esther Smith was the first editor of the business journal, and I said, Esther, you can't leave me, I need you. She said, you don't need me. I said, why is that? She says, you got the best PR person in your office there. Who's on? He said, Linda Rabbit. I said, she's my secretary. What are you talking about? And said, no, you ought to give her the job. And I did. And she did a bang up job of that. She came to me one day and she said that I want to be a partner. I said, well, you can't be a partner. You're not an accountant. You don't know anything about computers. Those are the two big things that we seem to need around here, people that know those. And she said, well, I really don't care about being a partner. I just want to make as much money as you make. I said, you don't know how much money I make. She said, but I got a pretty good idea. And I said, well, you're going to have to find something else to do for a living. And she says, all right, I will. And about 3 months later, she came back and said, I found it. And I said, what are you going to do? And she says, I'm going in the construction business. And I said, what do you know about construction? She said, absolutely nothing, but I can learn. And she went out and she found some folks to help her get started. And it wasn't always interesting. It was interesting, but it wasn't always positive times for her. She had some rough patches. But now her company and they'll do over $400 million a year. And she talk about making money. She went by me like in a flash. But it just shows you how helping people, and we're still good friends. We're still great friends. Linda and her family, our son and her husband are friends. And in fact, he does some investing with our son on multi-family investments. So it's great to watch that blossom, that helping people, and because people have helped you, and it's just wonderful.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to have a chance to have a conversation with Linda in a few weeks, and she does say a lot about your support early on in getting her business to succeed. And the fact that a lot of people say the sign of a great teacher is when the student, in some cases, even surpasses the master.
Big time. Got Veihmeyer. I got my feet stuck in the mud somewhere.
You have been a great teacher to many impactful people, from John going on being global chairman of KPMG to Linda's Rand Construction. Many of countless people in this region and beyond, Steve. And a big part of actually why I do these podcast conversations. So I love hearing that from you. So if you were to think back and you had a chance to give advice to a younger Steve Harlan or younger leaders with respect to what they should do to aspire to be impactful and successful as you have been, what advice would you give, Steve?
I'd say, you have to prepare yourself for what you're trying to do. You got, passing the CPA exams, people will say, well, that's a great achievement. Well, that's not achievement. That just gives you a ticket to play in the field. That's for openers, So you got to figure out what skill level you have to have, what knowledge you have to have, and you have to go about seeing about attaining that knowledge. But I think the main thing is to try to always be positive. You talked about, and I know you were heavily involved, and for years, were leading Dale Carnegie's efforts here in this area. You are a leader in that. Another good author, I'd say, Winning Friends and Influencing People. Everybody ought to read that. If you want to be in business, you better get that book and study it. It's worth it. And there's another book. If you want to really, it's Napoleon Hill's book. And these books were written in the 30s when there was such a depression in this country. When you think about the environment at that time, Napoleon Hill, Dale Carnegie wrote these books in the 30s. And they're just classics on how to be successful. Just Napoleon Hill's book on Think and Grow Rich and how you have to think through this and how you involve others. I mean, there's no, it's almost, it's not magic. It just happens to be truth. If you do these things and do them honestly and believe in them, it'll happen. I can't tell you how it happens. I don't know how it happens, but it happens, and it's wonderful.
Well, that's wonderful hearing it from you. By the way, Dale Carnegie was also a graduate of at University of Missouri, so you have that in.
No, I'd forgotten that. You're exactly
You have
right.
that
He
in
grew up in a
common.
little town in outstate Missouri.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, but it's brilliant advice from a person that has lived it, Steve. You have impacted a lot of individuals' lives, a lot of organizations, and arguably this entire region by setting DC, which is at the core of this region, straight financially. So you have shown through your behaviors what leadership is all about.
Well, I hope so. I hope so. I'm getting a little long of tooth now, so we'll see where this next chapter takes me.
Your energy and enthusiasm still inspires me. I really appreciate you joining me for this conversation on partnering leadership. Thank you so much, Steve Harlan.
Well, it was a pleasure. I hope somebody enjoys it as well. Thank you.